Gandalf versus Saruman. Who is the true master of magic in Middle-earth? Imagine two of Middle-earth's most powerful wizards in an epic battle of ideals, power, and loyalty. On one side, Gandalf, the wise and humble defender of freedom and light, a Maya dedicated to guiding the free peoples. On the other, Saruman, the once great leader of the Astari Order, who succumbed to the temptation of power and became Sauron's puppet. But what truly separates these two titans of the Lord of the Rings mythology? The confrontation between Gandalf and Saruman is not just a physical fight, but a philosophical battle between moral duty and corruption. Starting the list with Saruman. The wizard corrupted by pride and ambition. Saruman, known as Saruman the White, is one of the most powerful and complex characters created by J.R.R. Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. A charismatic leader, brilliant strategist, and master of magical arts, Saruman was initially a symbol of wisdom, but became a tragic example of how pride and the lust for power can lead to one's downfall. Let's dive into his story, motivations, rise, and eventual ruin in detail. Origins and mission in Middle-earth. Saruman was a Maya, a lesser divine spirit sent by the Vala, the gods of Middle-earth, and part of the Order of Astari, the five wizards sent to Middle-earth to aid in the fight against Sauron. His original name was Kirumo, and he possessed vast knowledge of science, technology, and magic. As the leader of the Astari, his mission was to guide the free peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron's threat, but subtly, without resorting to force or domination. Upon his arrival in Middle-earth, Saruman stood out for his intelligence and his expertise in the Rings of Power and the One Ring. This obsession with understanding Sauron's creation was already a warning sign of his future corruption. Saruman's rise. Leader of the Astari and head of the White Council, Saruman was chosen as the head of the Astari and became the leader of the White Council, which included other great figures like Gandalf and Galadriel. For a long time, Saruman was a respected figure admired for his wisdom and power. However, he always distrusted Gandalf, seeing him as a potential rival. This rivalry sowed the seeds of arrogance in his heart. When the White Council began to worry about Sauron's return, Saruman initially seemed committed to the cause. Yet, he was secretly drawn to the power of the One Ring. By studying the Rings of Power, Saruman came to believe that he could dominate Sauron and become the true ruler of Middle-earth. To Saruman's fall, pride and corruption. Saruman's corruption was gradual, fueled by his vanity and desire for absolute power. He began using the Palantir, one of the Seeing Stones, to spy on and communicate with other parts of Middle-earth. Unfortunately, in attempting to probe Sauron, he fell under the influence of the Dark Lord. Saruman believed he was manipulating Sauron, but in reality, he became a puppet of the enemy. His pride led to catastrophic decisions, declaring independence from the White Council and working in secret, fortifying Isengard, turning the Tower of Orthanc into a stronghold, and building an army of orcs and men to conquer Middle-earth, betraying the free peoples by allying with Sauron, believing he could overthrow him later and seize control. Saruman also became notorious for creating the Uruk-hai, a race of stronger and more loyal orcs capable of enduring sunlight. This innovation showcased his genius, but also his cruelty and disregard for the natural order. Saruman versus Gandalf. The final rivalry. The rivalry between Saruman and Gandalf reached its peak when Saruman tried to convince Gandalf to join him. Saruman believed that only by uniting with Sauron could they govern Middle-earth. When Gandalf refused, Saruman imprisoned him in Orthanc. However, Gandalf escaped with the help of Gwaihir, the Lord of the Eagles, and returned as Gandalf the White, a more powerful wizard ready to confront Saruman. Saruman's defeat was sealed at the Battle of Helm's Deep, where the armies of Rohan, led by Theoden and aided by Gandalf, defeated Isengard's forces. Afterward, the Ents, led by Treebeard, destroyed much of Isengard, and imprisoned Saruman in his own tower. Saruman's ultimate fall, and death even in defeat, Saruman refused to abandon his pride. When confronted by Gandalf at Orthanc, he rejected forgiveness and remained defiant. Eventually, he was released but was no longer a significant threat. In his decline, Saruman fled to the Shire, where he attempted to take control as a petty tyrant, using his cunning to manipulate the hobbits. His death was as tragic as his life. He was murdered by Grima Wormtongue, his once loyal servant, during the hobbits' return to the Shire. This melancholy end symbolized how Saruman, despite all his power and knowledge, ended as a pitiful and forgotten figure, destroyed by his own pride. The legacy of Saruman is a fascinating character because his story serves as a warning about the dangers of pride, greed, and unchecked ambition. He began as a symbol of wisdom and leadership, but was undone by his obsession with power, betraying his mission and losing himself to darkness. Despite his villainous acts, his story is deeply tragic, showing how even the wisest can fall when they abandon the principles they were meant to uphold. In the end, Saruman serves as a direct contrast to Gandalf, who chose humility and compassion over power and control. He reminds us that in the struggle between good and evil, personal choices have profound consequences for both the individual and the world around them. Nova Verso do GPT disponível. Continue. Gandalf, the guardian of freedom and hope in Middle-earth, known as Gandalf the Grey and later as Gandalf the White, is one of the most iconic characters in The Lord of the Rings. He symbolizes wisdom, courage, and the fight for the greater good, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. But the question remains, does Gandalf reach the same level of power as Saruman, the original leader of the Istari? To answer this, we must explore Gandalf's history, characteristics, and choices that shaped him into one of Middle-earth's greatest heroes. Gandalf's origin. The Maya Olorin like Saruman. Gandalf is a Maya, a type of divine spirit sent by the Vala to protect Middle-earth. His original name was Olorin, and he was known in Valinor's halls for his wisdom, humility, and compassion. Unlike Saruman, who sought technical knowledge and strategy, Olorin was motivated by understanding the hearts of people and inspiring them to fight against evil. When the Istari were sent to Middle-earth, Gandalf initially hesitated to take on the task, feeling unworthy. However, he was chosen precisely for his humility and noble character. He was entrusted with Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the 3 Elven rings, as a symbol of his mission to rekindle courage and hope in the free peoples. Gandalf's role, a leader through inspiration. Unlike Saruman, who sought domination and absolute power, Gandalf played a different role in Middle-earth. He never aimed to rule directly or gather armies under his command. His strength lay in his ability to inspire leaders and ordinary people, such as Aragorn, Frodo, Theoden, and the Hobbits, to unite against Sauron. He believed that true victory could only be achieved if the free peoples chose to fight for their own freedom. Gandalf, therefore, was a leader through example and inspiration rather than coercion. This approach sets him apart from Saruman and positions him as a morally superior figure to Gandalf's powers. Less physical, more spiritual in terms of raw power, Gandalf was initially not as strong as Saruman. As Gandalf the Grey, he appeared limited by his role and rarely demonstrated his true potential. He preferred to use his wisdom, persuasion, and courage to overcome challenges, leaving physical force as a last resort. However, when the situation demanded, Gandalf proved to be incredibly powerful. The fight against the Balrog in Moria. Gandalf showcased his strength and resilience by defeating one of the deadliest creatures in Middle-earth, an ancient spirit of fire and shadow. Resistance to the One Ring. Unlike Saruman, Gandalf resisted the temptation to wield the One Ring. He knew that while his power would grow, he would be corrupted by the ring's malice. This demonstrated his superior moral strength. When Gandalf was reborn as Gandalf the White, he surpassed Saruman in power and authority. He was literally remade by the Vala and returned as the rightful leader of the Istari, taking Saruman's place after his betrayal. Gandalf versus Saruman. Power versus wisdom. The rivalry between Gandalf and Saruman is one of the most significant in Tolkien's saga because it represents two opposite paths that a person of great power can take. While Saruman chose the path of pride and ambition, Gandalf chose humility and sacrifice. Here's a comparison of the two. Wisdom. Gandalf surpasses Saruman in this regard. While Saruman believed force and domination were the solution, Gandalf understood that true victory came through unity, hope, and the courage of the free peoples. Raw power. As Gandalf the White, he becomes more powerful than Saruman. His authority is confirmed by the White Council and the Vala themselves, making it clear he is the most deserving of the Istari. Moral strength. Gandalf consistently resisted corruption, whereas Saruman quickly succumbed to the allure of the One Ring and Sauron's influence. Ultimately, Gandalf surpasses Saruman not only in power, but also as a leader and a beacon of hope. That Gandalf's deeds, a testament to his greatness throughout his journey. Gandalf accomplished great feats that solidified him as one of the most important forces against Sauron. The Battle of Helm's Deep. Gandalf was instrumental in securing Rohan's victory by rallying the riders led by Eomer and arriving at the critical moment. The Council of Elrond. Gandalf played a key role in forming the Fellowship of the Ring, persuading all races to work together, guiding Frodo and Aragorn. Gandalf was Frodo's mentor, teaching him about the burden and dangers of the One Ring, while also guiding Aragorn to accept his destiny as King.is. Gandalf more powerful than Saruman? The answer depends on how we define power. Initially, Saruman had more knowledge, particularly about the rings of power and military strategy. But he abused this advantage, letting it corrupt him. Gandalf, on the other hand, demonstrated a more lasting and profound type of power: physical strength. As Gandalf the White, he surpasses Saruman in magical power and authority. Spiritual strength. Gandalf never strayed from his purpose, while Saruman was consumed by pride. Leadership. Gandalf was far more effective as a leader and mentor, uniting different peoples and inspiring hope, something Saruman could never achieve. Gandalf's legacy. Gandalf is more than a wizard. He is a symbol of hope, sacrifice, and selfless leadership. He proved that true power lies not in brute strength or domination, but in the ability to inspire others to find courage within themselves. By the end of his journey, Gandalf surpasses Saruman in every way. As a leader, as a wizard, and as a defender of freedom in Middle-earth. In the end, Gandalf is a testament to the idea that good can prevail, even in the face of the greatest adversities, as long as those who fight for it remain united and steadfast in their convictions. Gandalf versus Saruman. Who would truly triumph in a direct confrontation? The idea of a direct battle between Gandalf and Saruman is fascinating, as both are Istari, divine wizards sent by the Vala to help in the fight against Sauron. Both possess extraordinary abilities, but there are crucial differences in their powers, philosophies, and choices that would directly influence the outcome of a duel. Who would have the advantage? Let's break down this hypothetical battle in detail, taking into account their strengths, weaknesses, and characteristics as wizards. The starting point. Saruman and Gandalf. Before the transformation. Before Gandalf was reborn as Gandalf the White, Saruman would likely have had the upper hand. As the leader of the Istari, Saruman was originally the most powerful wizard, known for his wisdom, vast knowledge, and mastery of magical arts. He also had access to superior resources such as the armies of Isengard, the power of the Palantir, and his deep study of the Rings of Power. And on the other hand, Gandalf, as Gandalf the Grey, was more discreet and focused on inspiring the free peoples rather than exercising direct dominance. He rarely used magic in its most destructive form, preferring to solve problems with wisdom and strategy. For this reason, in a purely physical or magical confrontation, Saruman would initially have the upper hand. However, there is one crucial factor. Gandalf always had superior moral strength. He resisted the corruption of power, whereas Saruman succumbed to pride and ambition, making him vulnerable to Sauron's control. This means that even before his transformation, Gandalf had a spiritual advantage that should not be underestimated. Powers and abilities of each Saruman. The Wizard of Manipulation raw magical power. Saruman specialized in destructive magic and creation abilities, such as the breeding of the Uruk-hai and the manipulation of technology. He was also excellent at direct enchantments, as demonstrated by his ability to use his voice to control and persuade others. His enchanting voice was a powerful weapon capable of bending the will of leaders like Theoden. Intellect and strategy. Saruman was incredibly intelligent and strategic, making him a dangerous opponent in any battle. He would use tricks and manipulations to weaken his enemy before a direct confrontation. Weaknesses. Saruman's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He underestimated his enemies, believing that no one could surpass him. Additionally, his corruption by power left him more vulnerable to emotional and spiritual defeats. Gandalf, the guardian of hope, spiritual power, and resilience. Gandalf had far greater spiritual strength than Saruman. He resisted numerous temptations, including the One Ring, and remained faithful to his mission to protect Middle-earth. This emotional and spiritual resilience made him almost impervious to manipulations like Saruman's enchanting voice. Combat and sacrifice. Gandalf proved to be incredibly resilient in combat, defeating the Balrog in an epic duel that required all his strength. This showed his ability to face powerful enemies and emerge victorious, even in seemingly impossible situations. Weaknesses. As Gandalf the Grey, he was limited in physical power and relied more on alliances and strategies to win. However, after becoming Gandalf the White, he had no obvious weaknesses. The scenario. Gandalf the White versus Saruman the White after his transformation. Gandalf the White is an upgraded version of himself, with power equivalent to or greater than Saruman at his peak. At this point, he also assumes the role of the rightful leader of the Istari, replacing Saruman. Here is an analysis of what would happen in a direct confrontation between the two: physical and magical combat. Saruman would likely begin the battle using his destructive magic and his enchanting voice to destabilize Gandalf. However, as Gandalf had already proven himself immune to Saruman's manipulations in Orthanc, when he rejected Saruman's attempt to sway him, this tactic would fail. Gandalf, on the other hand, would use his defensive and offensive magic strategically. As Gandalf the White, he had access to greater powers, including abilities to neutralize Saruman's magic. This was demonstrated when Gandalf broke Saruman's staff in Isengard with a simple gesture: mental and spiritual strength. This is where Gandalf completely outclasses Saruman. Saruman had become spiritually weak due to his corruption, while Gandalf remained incorruptible. In a prolonged duel, Gandalf could defeat Saruman by exploiting his insecurities and emotional vulnerabilities, strategy, and leadership. Gandalf had the support of the free peoples and powerful allies, such as Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the Ents. Saruman, despite his army of orcs and Uruk-hai, would not have the same level of moral and strategic backing. This would give Gandalf a significant advantage, even in a larger-scale battle. Who would have the advantage? At the beginning of the journey, before his transformation, Saruman would have a slight advantage due to his superior knowledge of magic and resources. However, Gandalf could still win in a prolonged confrontation, especially with the involvement of allies. After Gandalf's transformation, as Gandalf the White, he surpasses Saruman in both power and authority. He is spiritually stronger, morally superior, and more resilient in combat. The fact that Gandalf defeated Saruman indirectly, by neutralizing his influence in Isengard and the White Council, already demonstrates that he is the more powerful wizard by the end of his journey. The final verdict, if Gandalf and Saruman faced each other in a duel, the result would depend on when this confrontation took place. Before Gandalf's transformation, Saruman would have a better chance of victory due to his raw power and magical abilities. However, after Gandalf became Gandalf the White, he would become practically invincible against Saruman. Gandalf combines magical power, spiritual strength, and strategic wisdom, making him the more complete and effective wizard. Saruman, with all his intellect and strength, was ultimately defeated by his own arrogance and corruption, which would seal his fate in any direct confrontation with Gandalf. Conclusion. In the end, Gandalf the White would have the advantage over Saruman, representing the triumph of goodness, humility, and wisdom over pride and corruption.